Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening to all of you, and also to those who are listening to us tonight live on Aspen Public Radio. I am Clark Irvin, the Director of the Homeland Security Counterterrorism Program here at the Aspen Institute, and as such, I'm the organizer of the annual Summer Aspen Security Forum. Welcome to our third annual forum, which, as you know, brings to Aspen each summer top-level present and former government officials, industry leaders, financiers, think tank and academic experts, nationally noted print and broadcast journalists, and concerned citizens to discuss and debate the major issues of the day in the field of national security, with a particular focus on homeland security and counterterrorism. We are enormously grateful to our sponsors, AGT International, IBM, the Robert R. McCormick Foundation, HFRX, The Cell, and Target, and we thank Target especially for underwriting tonight's reception. We're grateful also to our many supporters listed in the program. Our thanks go to our two media partners, the New York Times, and this year as well, CNN. And finally, I thank Tom and Bonnie McCloskey, whose support makes tonight's opening session as part of the McCloskey Speaker Series possible. As we gather tonight, as we all know, our nation faces a host of national security challenges, and I can think of no one better to discuss these challenges and no one better to lead that discussion than tonight's featured guest and moderator. With that, it's my great pleasure to welcome to the podium my dear friend and the host of CNN's Situation Room, Wolf Blitzer, who will now discuss things with our guest.
McRaven. That chair says McRaven, so he's sitting there. Hey, thank you so much for coming out. A lovely crowd we have here in Aspen. This is a rough assignment for the Admiral and for me. It's a pleasure. I've been coming to the Aspen Institute, by the way, since 1983, and I come usually every summer, so I love it out here. And it's a pleasure to be here with a real hero, and you are a hero. Thank you so much for everything you're doing. And speak not only as an American citizen, obviously, but as a former Pentagon correspondent who's had a little interest in what you've been up to over these many years. We always think of, in recent years, of course, at least the past year, with Admiral McRaven as the orchestrator, the architect of the raid that killed Osama bin Laden. And, you know, we've all read a lot about it. I know Peter Bergen is here. He's written a whole book about it, an excellent book about it. But this is the guy who's sitting right here, who had the guts to tell the commander-in-chief, we should do it, let's do it. And when you ordered that raid, and when you said you think you did, you didn't even know for sure that bin Laden was in Abbottabad at that compound about a mile or so away from the west point of Pakistan, did you?
Well, let me make one thing clear. I didn't order the raid.
But he told the President of the United States that he thought he could do it.
Yeah, I mean, and this is not a small point. The fact of the matter is, it was the President of the United States that ordered the raid.
And he deserves an enormous amount of credit for that decision. And when he came to the head of special operations, that would be you, and said, what do you think? What did you say?
Well, first, I will tell you that it was a long process to get there. And our piece of it, the military piece of kind of what I look at as kind of three components, was probably the easiest aspect of the entire raid. The two other pieces of this were the CIA's role, and I think when the history is finally written and outlined and exposed on how the CIA determined that bin Laden was there, it will be one of the great intelligence operations in the history of intelligence organizations. And a tremendous amount of that credit goes to Director Leon Panetta at the time, because he built the right team, he had the right people, he made some very gutsy calls, and he was not concerned about who got the credit. And so when you take a look at how he built that team, which was a military and intelligence team, tremendous amount of credit goes to the agency. And the other piece of this really is the President and his national security team. I've made it very clear to people, again, the military piece of this, we did, I think, 11 other raids that evening in Afghanistan. Now, I don't want to diminish the nature of this raid. It was a little bit more sporty. And we understood that there were some strategic implications to it. But at the end of the day, it was what we have been doing really for 10 years. The president and his national security team, I'm not a political guy, but I will tell you, as an interested observer in this, they were magnificent in how they handled the start to finish. We went through a number of meetings. The president asked all the right questions. His national security team with Secretary Gates, Secretary Clinton, Chairman Mullen, the vice chairman, Tom Donilon, Dennis McDonough, and John Brennan, and others really did a fine job of digging down to find out the facts, to make their recommendations based on the facts. And of course, the president gave me ample time to prepare once the concept was approved. But at the end of the day, make no mistake about it, it was the President of the United States that shouldered the burden for this operation, that made the hard decisions, that was instrumental in the planning process because I pitched every plan to him. So any indication that Bill McRaven, ordered this raid, led this raid, was, the key piece of this raid is just patently false.
But you're a Navy SEAL, and these men who went in there, Navy SEALs, they were taking orders from you directly.
They were.
You were speaking to all of them. You knew each one of them personally. Here's just a technical question. Did you rehearse it in advance?
Well, I'm not going to talk about the tactical details, but obviously we're not going to do a mission like that without rehearsing. We rehearse every operation, particularly significant ones like that. As I said, I have made a point of not talking about the tactical piece of this, other than to say that it is what we do. We get on helicopters, we go to objectives, we secure the objectives, we get back on helicopters, and we come home. So I was short one helicopter, but...
Well, that stealth helicopter, when it went down, and all of us have read about it, we've heard about it, I've spoken to people who were in that room, the White House Situation Room, which is opposed to another Situation Room. But when that helicopter went down, there was a gasp, because a lot of the folks there, correct me if I'm wrong, thought of Desert One in 1980, Jimmy Carter's plan to rescue Americans in Iran.
Well, I wouldn't pretend to tell you what they were thinking.
What were you thinking?
I was too busy, frankly. We had a backup plan. We executed the backup plan, and at that point in time, you're worried about getting the mission done and getting the boys back home. So we had a plan, suffice to say.
And it worked.
And it worked.
That helicopter, by the way, is all that, the stealth technology and all that, is that gone? Has it been shared with bad guys?
I'm not going to address that.
You don't want to talk about it. Curious. All right, let's talk a little bit about, and I want to nail this down as best as I can. You didn't have 100% knowledge, the president didn't have 100% knowledge that bin Laden was holed up in that compound. Did you have 80%, 50%? Give me a ballpark. How confident were you that a tall guy was hiding out in that compound?
Well, again, I'm not going to address the tactical piece of that. Suffice to say, we were not sure he was there. And again, that gets back to some tough decisions that were made. My job was to get him if he was there. If he wasn't there, we would know that pretty quickly, and our intent was to get up and get out.
I suspect you're not going to want to answer this question, but I'll ask it anyhow. And as the Admiral and I know, we just spent some quality time together. This is the United States of America. We can ask the questions. He doesn't have to answer them, but we can ask the questions. And I think it's an important question that at least I've always been very, very curious about. Was the mission to capture bin Laden, or was the mission to kill bin Laden?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not going to answer it.
All right. But there were contingencies. This guy would be brought out in a helicopter and brought somewhere.
Did they teach you this, to do the end around when the first question doesn't work?
Just trying to make sure, you don't want to discuss that.
No.
All right. And I told the Admiral, he's got a sensitive job, as you know. We got to protect sources and methods, classified information, and we fully appreciate.
And my career, for whatever.
That's also
whatever will be left of it after this.
That's also very important. You don't do a lot of these interviews, do you?
No.
Is this the first interview like this you've ever done?
It is the first interview.
How does it feel so far?
Ask me again in an hour.
I think it's a statement and it's a tribute to the Aspen Institute that the first interview with the head of special operations with Admiral McRaven is done here in Aspen at the Aspen Institute, and it's a tribute to all of the Aspen Institute folks who are here, and I thank you on their behalf.
Thank you.
I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back to Bin Laden in a moment, but let's do a little special operations for dummies right now.
Okay.
What is special operations?
Yeah, well, great question. We get a lot of notoriety for the raids, for the rescue operations, and frankly, we're very proud of that. When the nation calls on us to do those sort of operations, they expect us to be successful every single time, and I expect the guys to be successful, and they expect to be successful. But the fact of the matter is, that's a small portion of what we do. When you take a look at where we are around the globe today, we are in 79 countries, I think, today. Only one of those is Afghanistan. The other 78 countries, we are out there building partner capacity. We're trying to teach other nations how to deal with their own problems so they don't grow violent extremists. We're building wells in places. We're doing civil affairs operations. We're doing information operations to buy down things like corruption. So there is a whole spectrum of things that special operations do that rarely get the press's attention because it's not sexy. It doesn't sound terribly good or terribly bad at that point in time, but when you put the totality of it together, you have nations out there that have not gone extremist because special operations forces have been working there for decades. So that's really a piece of the story.
How many men and women do you command?
66,000 today. But let me qualify that term. Of the 66,000, you've got about 44,000 of those are people that can deploy forward. Of those 44,000, about 33,000 are kind of badged special operations or tactical units. So special forces officers, Navy SEALs, Rangers, Night Stalkers that fly helicopters. Those are the tactical units. So of those 33 to 35,000 folks, we deploy about 10 to 12,000 a day, or are constantly deployed. So right now in Afghanistan, our number's close to 7,000 and then another 3,000 spread out across the globe. We've got a good budget that supports that. And I'm a very interesting, what we call combatant command. I'm one of the only combatant commands that has service-like responsibilities. And, if you look at Central Command, for example, Jim Mattis is Central Command. He is in charge of a vast array of countries in terms of the military responsibility.
He's in charge of the Middle East and South Asia.
But he doesn't have a budget to do acquisition programs. When we were legislated into action in 1987, the Congress gave us a budget, Major Force Program 11. Very, very important because it allows me to put capability into the hands of the operators very rapidly. So if we identify a problem and an operator, says, I need a new weapon, I need a new boat, I need a better helicopter, then I'm in a position, because we have an acquisition authority, to be able to turn that requirement quickly and get it back out in the field.
Special operations is one of only two Pentagon budgets that's not being cut. In fact, it's going up.
Well, I think that remains to be seen. Suffice to say, we did pretty well in the president's budget that was put forward, and we're very thankful for that. And we'll see where it goes from there.
What's the top mission that you have right now?
Yeah. Well, my job is to provide support to the geographic combatant commanders. So as we talked about, the guys that actually fight the fight from the military standpoint are the geographic combatant commanders, CENTCOM, SOUTHCOM, EUCOM, and my job is to provide them, the best forces I can. They are the ones that execute the military mission within their area of responsibility. So job one for me is to man, train, equip, and deploy forces in support of the geographic combatant commanders. I do not do any command and control from down in Tampa.
This is an enormously difficult if you're in special operations, a lot of these men and women who serve, 66,000 you say, right? How many of them are women?
I don't know the exact figure, but we have a lot of females serving in special operations. They do a fantastic job across the board. There are obviously some some legislation where they cannot operate in tactical ground units. But having said that, great support to all of those units, and we couldn't do the job without them.
Now, I know a lot of these people over the decades that I've covered this story, a former Pentagon correspondent myself during the first Gulf War. The stress is enormous. The training is very, very rigid, very, very difficult. They serve 2, 3, 4, 5 tours in a war zone. A lot of them come back obviously injured. Some of them don't come back at all. They come back and they have post-traumatic stress. And the suicide rate, unfortunately, is really getting higher and higher, certainly higher than it was 20 years ago.
Right.
Why?
Well, let me give you a little bit broader answer to that. Before I took command, my predecessor, Admiral Eric Olson, initiated a study to take a look at the pressure on the force. And they spent 10 months looking at all of our units. I think they talked to somewhere in the neighborhood of 7,000 soldiers, about 1,000 spouses, went to over 400 different meetings to determine whether or not what the status of the force was. And that report landed on my desk about the time I took command. And frankly, as Eric Olson had said a number of times in testimony, the force was frayed. And I think that was exactly the right term. We're not crumbling, we're not destroyed, but we were clearly fraying a year ago. I think that fraying is getting a little worse. We are putting an inordinate amount of effort into making sure that we are now preserving the force and families. I have taken a look at the scope of the problem. I've assigned a general officer. I've got my command sergeant major and myself are going out. We're talking to the troops. We're trying to find out what the real issues are. You can look at statistics, but statistics don't tell you everything. For example, you talked about our suicide rate. It is as high as it has been in recorded history in terms of how long we've been keeping track of this, which is really a couple of years now. Having said that, most people would think, well, that's a result of the fact that guys have been in hard combat, they've seen their buddy killed in front of them, but we don't find that necessarily to be the case. The suicides that we are tracking right now tend to be related to a couple of things. Relationships. There's always a bad relationship in there. There's alcohol or drugs that are involved, and there are some other things that contribute to it. But it's not as easy as saying this kid was in combat, and that's why he has that kind of stress that caused him to commit suicide. So I will tell you there is a tremendous effort on the part of the Secretary of Defense, actually the Commander-in-Chief on down, to take a hard look at our problems with suicide and do something about them. And we are making a full court press to do that. What
made you, Admiral McRaven, want to go and become a Navy SEAL?
An Army Green Beret.
That would be your dad.
No, actually, it was a guy my sister was dating. Now, this was in the probably very early 70s. The movie The Green Beret had come out, starring John Wayne. And this young Army captain came to meet my sister for a date. My sister, as usual, was late. So I had an opportunity to talk to him for a little while, and he knew I was interested in the Navy. And he said, hey, if you're going to go into the Navy, you ought to be a Navy SEAL. Well, back in 1971, 72 timeframe at the time, you never heard of Navy SEALs. So I had to do a little digging. Hard to believe now, but then you didn't. And so to my Army brethren, of which it's a very large Army organization that I'm honored to be in charge of, I attribute the fact that I'm a Navy SEAL to my Army Green Beret brothers.
How many try out to become a Navy SEAL, and how many are eventually accepted?
Well, historically, and I'm not exactly sure what today's figures are, but I will tell you that historically, it's about a 50% will make it through. Now, that's kind of split in the officers and the enlisted. The officers tend to do a little better in terms of their success rate because we start with them a little bit earlier at the naval academies, at other areas. The enlisted rate tends to be a little bit lower on that scale, but we're working very hard to get more folks through without diminishing the quality, because at the end of the day, it is the quality of the individual we get that will make us successful on the battlefield, not the quantity.
When you look at a young man or woman out there, 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old, who wants to be a Navy SEAL, what do you look for?
Well, we look for a couple things. One, they got to be able to think on their feet. The physical aspect of it is important, but we all know people that are very physically fit but can't think on their feet. At the end of the day, I want somebody that can think react and operate under pressure and make the right decision. Somebody that's got some life experience, some maturity. What you find across the soft spectrum is that the average operator is about 34 years old, married with 2 kids, spent about 6 years in the conventional force. So he's got some life experience. And now that's not always true. The young SEALs come in. Some of them are 18, 19 years old. The young Rangers come in. Some of them are 18, 19 years old. But across the board, our population is a little bit more experienced. But at the end of the day, the physical piece is important, but thinking on your feet is the most important piece.
A lot of people don't realize that you had an excellent major when you were in college. You want to tell everyone here what you majored in college?
Yeah, I majored in journalism.
Excellent.
What was I thinking?
Excellent major. You majored in journalism, and you used that skill, the writing skill that you developed, I assume, because you did some academic work on special operations forces around the world, and you took a look at some of the great special operations missions, the commando operations, the missions, some of the not so great ones. Right. I forget about bin Laden for a second. Tell me the 2 or 3 greatest special operations missions that you studied and you learned from.
Yeah, well, I was fortunate enough to go to the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey and had an opportunity to do some good thinking and research on special operations. And I was originally trying to figure out what the principles of special operations were. There have historically been principles of war, mass, maneuver, size, those sort of things. But I knew that a successful special operation was different because invariably you've got a smaller force going against a well-defended force. But more times than not, that special operations force succeeded. So the question was, why did it succeed? I did 8 different case studies. The couple ones that jump out at me, interestingly enough, was the Army Special Forces raid on the POW compound in Sante, North Vietnam. And while the prisoners were not there, and we were not successful in rescuing the prisoners, when you look at how those great Green Berets and airmen and helicopter pilots planned, rehearsed, and executed that operation, other than the fact that the intelligence was flawed and we were not able to get the POWs, it was, almost flawless in terms of the execution. And the one thing that taught me, because I had an opportunity to interview a lot of these soldiers, was that they rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed and then rehearsed again. And they looked at plan A, plan B, plan C, and plan D because they knew at the end of the day that no good plan survives first contact with the enemy. And so when things did go wrong to some degree on the target in Sante, they quickly flexed. The other one was the raid on Entebbe, the Israeli raid on Entebbe. Different model in that they didn't have as much time, but they had a very, very capable force. But in their case, they were very ingenious in how they approached the problem set. They knew they had to get close to the target. They knew they had to use some operational deception, which they did. As you recall, they had a Mercedes with an Idi Amin lookalike. That gave them just enough time to be able to get to target and execute the mission. Unfortunately, Jonathan Netanyahu was killed in the operation. But having said that, exceedingly successful operation. So when I look at kind of from a U.S. or an international standpoint, those are 2 that jump out. But frankly, there are equally magnificent special operations going on today in Afghanistan and in the past years in Iraq that would probably rival any of those. They just didn't get the kind of recognition that they probably deserve.
One of the controversial areas, and I want you to discuss it as much as you can in Afghanistan right now, are these night raids that are going on. And the Afghans, and I interviewed President Hamid Karzai at the NATO summit in Chicago not that long ago, and as someone who's watched all of this unfold, it's still hard for me to believe, except the fact that the U.S. still has almost 90,000 troops in Afghanistan right now. U.S. taxpayers still are spending about $2 billion a week, $100 billion a year maintaining that military presence in Afghanistan right now. Yet Hamid Karzai occasionally, and I criticized him for it in front of him, he seems to think he's doing us a big favor by letting us do that. How do you deal with that? when you're dealing with someone you have a mission to do, and the host country occasionally not only says bad things, but isn't necessarily all that receptive to what you're trying to do?
Yeah, well, it is a sovereign country, and we absolutely respect the Afghan sovereignty. Now, again, as I mentioned earlier, I don't conduct operations in Afghanistan anymore in my role as the U.S. Special Operations Commander. That's the purview of General John Allen, his role as the ISAF commander, and then General Jim Mattis in his role as the CENTCOM commander as they report to the Secretary and the President. So what I can tell you is that on the night raids and in the course of our operations in Afghanistan, we are completely partnered with the Afghans now. And that has really mitigated a lot of, I think, the senior Afghan concern about these night raids. The night raids are important for a lot of reasons. Tactically, the enemy, as we say, beds down at night. So they will stop in a compound at night, and it makes it easier for us to locate them. Also at nighttime, the local population is not moving around as much, so frankly, the opportunity to have an unfortunate civilian casualty is lessened by the fact that it's at night. But we absolutely understand the Afghans' concerns about night raid. Nobody wants somebody coming into their house in the middle of the night. Having said that, we are working with the Afghans, within the Afghan legal system, to be able to execute raids both daytime and, where required, nighttime, in order to get after a target that is beneficial to the Afghans and to the United States.
In recent months, and maybe it's been longer, there have been incidents where Afghanis dressed in military uniforms have killed American troops. Raising the question, do you trust these guys that you go on a sensitive night raid with because they're armed, they're loaded, they may be totally loyal to the Taliban?
We trust them 100%. And the fact of the matter is, when you spend time with the guys that we spend time with, I mean, you realize they are just as patriotic, just as committed, just as tough, just as courageous as the American soldier that's partnered with them. So for the folks that we work with, I don't think trust has ever been an issue. That's not to say that there aren't people out there that aren't trustworthy. And we have to recognize that, and we need to always, I think, be a little bit on guard. But the Afghans are wonderful people. Candidly, I think we've done a good job of partnering with them, and I think we'll continue to do that as we go forward. When
all troops, U.S. troops, are out by the end of 2014, starting next year, you're going to be withdrawing those numbers big time. You think that that country is really going to be a stable, friendly country to the United States?
Well, again, that's one. I'm not sure all U.S. troops will be out by 2014. That's certainly a decision by the president and President Karzai.
But I thought they've made that decision already.
Well, what they've made is that there's going to be a long-term strategic agreement between the United States and the government of Afghanistan.
So they'll negotiate how many troops, trainers, and others might stay afterwards. Special operations forces, for example.
I think that is the case. Yes.
All right. So, but most of the 90,000 will be gone. They'll be. After 2040, what are you thinking about? 5,000, 10,000?
Yeah, it's, again, not my place to discuss that. That remains with General Allen and the Afghans and the President to kind of make those decisions.
Because I heard the same arguments, the same points being made when the U.S. was withdrawing all of its troops from Iraq. Well, even after the U.S. withdrew all of its troops from Iraq, there would still be a continued U.S. military presence in Iraq. But guess what? There's no continued U.S. military presence in Iraq right now because the Iraqis did not want to give the U.S. military immunity from Iraqi prosecution. And I suspect, I could be wrong, that the Afghanis probably won't want to do that either.
Again, that's a policy decision, Wolf, and not in my lane, so to speak.
But you spent a lot of time in Iraq.
I did.
What's happening right now, and just the past 48 hours, we've seen several dozen terrorist incidents. Right. The country looks like we don't pay that much attention anymore because the U.S. forces are out of Iraq. But it looks like a horrible situation that's developing in Iraq right now. I'm very worried about it. What about you?
Well, I mean, we're certainly concerned about al-Qaeda in Iraq coming back. I think we recognized this would be a problem. But, the Iraqi security forces, as we were exiting Iraq, they're very capable security forces. This is a tough problem set for them. It's very complex. But I'm confident that they understand what the problem is, and hopefully they'll be able to deal with it as time goes on. But I mean, clearly, al-Qaeda in Iraq is is a problem that they've got to deal with.
The other huge problem, Iraq's a huge problem, Afghanistan's a huge problem. What about Pakistan right now? And I want you to get into, as much as you can, what we call drone strikes. It's a sensitive issue. The Pakistanis obviously complaining about it all the time. But under President Obama, the U.S. has intensified the drone attacks against various targets in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, and other places as well. What can you tell us about that?
Nothing.
I'll rephrase the question. Here's what we know. Some of these drone strikes are organized by the CIA, but some are organized by the U.S. military, including special operations. Is that right?
What I can tell you is the military uses drones in Afghanistan routinely to conduct strikes.
In Afghanistan?
In Afghanistan.
But you don't want to talk about other places?
Don't want to talk about other places.
It's a very sensitive subject.
Then why would I talk about it?
Of course. I've heard, he's very good. I've heard top U.S. officials, Secretary Panetta and others, testify there are fewer al-Qaeda elements left in Afghanistan today than there are in Yemen, for example, or Somalia, for that matter. Is that true?
Yeah, I think that's a true statement. And again, it's been a year since I've been in Afghanistan. But the number of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, a year ago, numbers in somewhere in the 100 or so. They can still be key interlocutors, so we're always wary of them. And where there are al-Qaeda, I know the military makes very aggressive stands to go after them. So they are still a problem in Afghanistan that we have to deal with. Are there more in Yemen? Based on the reports I see and the open press reports, there certainly appear to be a lot of al-Qaeda in Yemen.
And what should the U.S. be doing about that, or in Somalia for that matter?
Yeah, well, I think what the U.S. is doing is they're partnering with the government of Yemen. The government of Yemen has been very supportive in this partnership. And we are, again, working with the Yemeni forces so that they can take care of their own security problems. And as they made the transition from President Saleh to President Hadi, that transition, frankly, probably went better than we would have expected. President Hadi has done a good job of kind of stepping up to the plate, taking this threat of al-Qaeda in Yemen seriously. And because of that, the United States is, again, reaching out to him where it is appropriate to do so.
I was in Cairo and Tunis with Secretary of State Hillary Clinton about a year or so ago, maybe a little bit more, and she walked around Tahrir Square, and the Arab Spring everyone seemed to be very upbeat, very positive, very confident that democracy was moving in the right direction in North Africa, in the Middle East. But now people aren't that confident. Can you give us your assessment of what's going on in the Arab Spring?
Yeah, well, I'm certainly not an expert on the Arab Spring. What I know is democracy is hard, and I've watched it as we've tried to build democracies in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's tough. It took us a long time as a nation to build a strong democracy. It will probably take them some time. But again, I'm not an expert on the dynamics of the Middle East. My job is kind of purely in a military role to support, again, in this case, General Mattis or Admiral Stavridis as required.
But you do work closely with foreign militaries.
Absolutely.
How does that work out? I mean, give us a little description. I'll throw out an example, Israel.
Okay.
What do you do with Israel?
Well, I won't focus on Israel. What I'll tell you is with all the countries, as I said, we're in about 78 additional countries above and beyond Afghanistan today. We work, first thing we do is we go in and we sit down with the country team, the chief of mission, the ambassador, make sure that our goals are consistent with the ambassador's goals. There is some belief out there that somehow we have a separate agenda from the ambassador, and I will tell you that's absolutely not the case. We sit down with the ambassador.
So if you go into a country, whether Israel or Egypt or any other country, first thing you do is meet with the U.S. ambassador.
Before we ever go into a country, the U.S. ambassador and the country team have to provide us country clearance in order to get into the country. So any thought that, somehow special operations guys, slip into a country and do things that are outside the purview of the embassy is just patently wrong. Everything we do supports the embassy mission there, and that starts, months before we ever enter a country. So we'll work with the embassy. We will partner with a unit that is vetted, that's gone through the Leahy vetting to make sure that there are no human rights violations.
What vetting is that?
The Leahy Amendment is an amendment that basically tells us we have got to make sure that the partners we are working with have really no human rights violations, so that we're partnering with the right people.
This is after Senator Patrick Leahy.
Correct. Once all that is done and a unit is identified, then we will partner with that unit. And a lot of times it's basic infantry tactics, dependent upon the unit, to get them up to a certain level. And then when they're at the appropriate level, military level, then we can kind of continue to, we do the crawl, walk, run approach, if you will. And then some of the countries obviously have high-end counterterrorism units, and it's easier for us to kind of partner with them and kind of share tactics, techniques, and procedures. But in every case, regardless of the country, there's a partnering with the embassy. There's an understanding of what the embassy's requirements are, what the geographic combatant commander's requirements are. We make sure that's all understood before we ever set foot in a foreign country.
And then there's usually, with a friendly country, there's pretty good cooperation.
Absolutely.
Whether a NATO ally or other countries.
You bet.
And you train each other, you help each other, you learn from each other. There's a good dialogue going on.
Absolutely. I mean, there's this belief that, as we go in as Americans to a less developed country, that somehow we're doing all the teaching. And that's absolutely not the case. The fact of the matter is, we go into a country, we're learning a lot about their culture. And the one thing we talk about within special operations is understanding the human domain. The human domain, I mean, you can think of it as you got the maritime, the ground, the air, and then there's a human domain you have to operate in. And that's the kind of the totality of the physical, the cultural environment that has to do with the people that you're dealing with. So as we go into a country in Africa or in the Middle East or in the Pacific region, we're learning about them. We're learning what their culture is. So next time we come back in, they understand who we are. We understand who they are. You got to build that trust, and you can't surge trust. So you've got to start it early, and that's one of the things Special Operations Forces do very well. Small footprint. We don't take a lot of guys to do that, and pretty cost effective.
How good is the U.S. right now in linguistic skills? Do you have enough Arabic speakers, for example, to get the job done from your perspective?
Yeah, we're always short on our linguistic skills. To learn Arabic, it's a very difficult language. We've got some great training that takes place at most of the major institutions we have within Special Operations, primarily at Fort Bragg. But we take immersion training downrange, if you will, in a variety of countries. We'll do anything we can to get our guys up to speed in Arabic, Pashto, Tagalog, whatever the required language is. Maintaining those skills is difficult, but I think we do a pretty good job as a force. But I won't kid you, it's a difficult problem set. One we do pretty well, but there's never enough Arab or Pashto linguists to go around to really deal with all the problems we have to deal with.
And you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, I suspect you won't. The Navy SEALs who went in to get bin Laden, did they speak other languages other than English?
Yes.
Okay. That's it. All right, that's important. Because not only were they courageous and in great physical shape and brilliant, but they also spoke at least one other language.
They did, yeah, absolutely.
All of them or some of them?
No, just some of them.
Okay, just want to be precise. That's very, very important. I told our guests here and those who are listening and watching that we'd come back to the bin Laden raid. And there's been so much written about it, and I know some of it is great, but some of it not so great. Share with us one nugget that without violating sources and methods or classified information, that you believe is important that the American people know about this raid that they may not have read about or don't know about, something that you want to share.
Yeah. I think what the American people, they probably know, but they may not appreciate, is how great our interagency process is. And I look around the audience at some of our great interagency representatives here. But when you look at the CIA, the FBI, the Defense Intelligence Agency, NGA, Homeland Security, National Counterterrorism Center, all of these folks, day in and day out, that are going after the threat that's out there, that are looking at the threat, that are protecting the American people, and how well they work together day in and day out. And you don't see that. You tend to think that the FBI's lane is very clear and that the CIA's lane is very clear and that Defense Intelligence is very clear. But in reality, they are all talking to each other all day long, making sure that the information they've got and the intelligence they've got is right. They're checking and double-checking. So as we went into the bin Laden raid, this thought that this is going to be difficult, pulling the military and the CIA together, along with the support we had from the National Security Agency and NGA and others, this was easy for us. It was easy for us because for the last 10 years, we've been doing this. We've been building this interagency team, and I got to tell you, today it hums. On the margins, are there problems? Sure. But if you talk to Bob Mueller or Keith Alexander here or Dave Petraeus, I mean, we've known each other all for a long time. We're not only colleagues, we are friends. And so when you have that trust, everything else is easy. And we built that trust up over many, many years.
And how good is the intelligence? Because without good intelligence, in the bin Laden raid, if you didn't have good intelligence,
sure,
you wouldn't have known anything. But when you go into a mission in Afghanistan or any place else in the world, do you have confidence in the intelligence you're getting? We
have the best intelligence agencies in the world, bar none. And there's nobody even close to us.
We're going to take questions from some of you, too, so you might want to get ready. I have a few more, but start thinking of a question. This is a rare opportunity we all have. I got a few questions that may or may not be relevant. You were runner-up for 2011's Time Magazine's Person of the Year. How disappointed were you?
Yeah, I'm not even sure how to answer that, Wolf. I will tell you that my hope and if there's anybody from Time here, they will know the background of this, is certainly wasn't my intent to be the Time Magazine runner-up or the Time Man of the Year. And frankly, I fended off a number of attempts to have interviews because it isn't about me. I mean, it's about that young E5 with 2 kids, married and 2 kids, who's on his 11th and 12th deployment. That's who the real heroes are out here. And to put, to put my face on it, frankly, is not what I wanted. What I was hoping was that it would be the Special Operations, Soldier or Warrior of the Year, because you got Sergeant Leroy Petrie, Medal of Honor winner. We've got Navy Cross and Distinguished Service Cross winners. We've got Silver Star winners out there. I mean, it was a phenomenal year for Special Operations. And frankly, to focus on me and the bin Laden raid, just didn't necessarily set well with me.
What did it feel like? And I was anchoring our coverage of the President's State of the Union address when you were invited to sit next to the First Lady up in the gallery before a joint session of the United States Congress. And you were obviously introduced, and the whole world was watching. What did that feel like, a Navy SEAL, just a guy like you?
Well, it was quite an honor. It's the White House had reached out to me a couple weeks before and invited me on behalf of the First Lady and the President to sit in the box, and I thought it was a very gracious offer, and I was honored to do so. And really to help represent the men and women in uniform, in addition to the Joint Chiefs that were present at the State of the Union. Did you have to go through clearances and authorization from your commanders, or when the Commander-in-Chief says, "I want you up in that gallery," you're in the gallery? Well, yes, in a word. Yeah. So I mean, it was understood. In discussions with the Secretary and the Chairman, they understood the offer. And as I said, I was honored to accept the offer. Is he what kind of Commander-in-Chief is he? The President of the United States is fantastic. And again, I'm not a political guy. I've worked in both administrations. I very, very much enjoyed working for President Bush, and I very much enjoy working for President Obama. And it's, again, this isn't about politics. This is about a commander-in-chief who I have the opportunity to engage with on a routine basis, and watching him and the decisions he makes along with his national security team. They're a very impressive group of guys and gals. And so, you know, as an operational, as a commander, I feel comfortable that when we present our best military advice to the President and his team, they take it very seriously. They consult routinely with the senior leadership of the military, and they do the best they can to make the right decisions. So, yeah, that's my personal opinion, but I'm very again, very impressed with the President and his national security team.
I've heard that from others as well. In your position, the fact that he never served in the military and Mitt Romney never served in the military, is that at all a factor that the American people should consider at all?
Well, I know from the uniform military standpoint, I mean, we serve the President and the Commander-in-Chief, and irrespective of whether they served in uniform or not. So again, I'm not going to get into the political discussion, but I will tell you we're proud to serve whoever sits in the White House.
Without violating any sensitive classified information.
Why do you start every?
Because I know you. Just walk us through what you know, in general terms, because you're not going to be specific, where you go from the Aspen Institute.
In terms of
what will be a normal, you know, week for you next week?
Yeah, I'd have to ask my aide de camp to find out what the heck I'm doing next week. To be honest with you, I mean, I spend a lot of time up in Washington D.C. Because, as I said, I've got dual responsibilities.
You're based in Tampa.
I'm based in Tampa.
That's where the Special Operations Command is headquartered.
Right. I'm based in Tampa. Fantastic town. Great support from the people there in Tampa for both U.S. Special Operations Command and Central Command. But I spend a couple days a week up in Washington, D.C. Because, again, as I said, I have service-like responsibilities. So as we're working through budget issues, as we're beginning to build the next Program Objective Memorandum, the POM, it's important that I'm up there to interface with my service components. One of the things that's very important to understand about special operations is that we are not special operations without the support of the larger services, the Army, Navy, Air Force, and the Marine Corps. They provide us a very, very large part of our capability. We would not be the special operations forces we are without the support of the services. So again, this gets back to the trust and relationship I have with guys like General Ray Odierno, General Nordy Schwartz, Jim Amos. You know, these are great working relationships, and John Grainer at the CNO. Great working relationships, great personal relationships. So as we get into kind of tough issues, budget issues, we can sit down across the table with each other and come to good decisions. So I spend a fair amount of time in Washington, D.C. I like to get out, obviously, and visit the troops. And they are spread out across the entire continental United States, and as I mentioned, across the globe. But my responsibility for the troops based in the continental United States is to make sure that they are, you know, trained and equipped to the best level they can be. So as I get out on the road, I am looking hard at whether or not I am meeting their expectations in terms of providing the equipment they need, and frankly, that they're meeting mine and the nation's expectations and being the best special operations warriors they can be. And
they're excellent indeed. We're going to take some questions. We'll ask you another question before we move on to your questions. The Pentagon's overall budget, and you're only responsible for part of that, and your budget is in relatively good shape. But, you know, Leon Panetta, the Defense Secretary, he's very upset. He's very worried about what he calls the hollowing out of the U.S. military. I was just with him in Brussels at NATO headquarters, and he was very, you know, I interviewed him, and he was, you know, pretty worried that he's already cut $500 billion over the next 10 years. And if the sequestration goes through, if there's the fiscal cliff or whatever, and another $500 billion over the next 10 years has to be cut, he doesn't know if that's, you know, what the impact of that is going to be. Here's the question that I have. Because others are saying, you know what, with all the troops coming out of Iraq, Most of the troops, pretty soon will be out of Afghanistan. The military can afford to cut its expenditures. And right now, and I think it's a fact, we've fact-checked this, the U.S. military, the U.S. Defense Department, its annual budget is higher than the next 15 countries combined. And that includes friendly countries, NATO allies like Britain and Canada and France and Italy. It includes not-so-friendly countries like China and Russia. And it includes adversaries like Iran, North Korea, and other countries. So why does the United States, why do American taxpayers need to spend so much more than the next 15 countries combined?
Well, I think you'd have to ask the American taxpayers whether or not they feel that the value they get from their military is worthwhile. Again, this is a issue for the American people. I will tell you, needless to say, absolutely agree with the Secretary. We're not even planning for sequestration. The Secretary has made his concerns known to the President and to the Hill, and we're going to let the Office of the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary, and the President kind of fight that budget battle. But it's always up to the American people on how much military they think they need to do the jobs that are out there and to fend off the threats that are coming our way.
Good answer. All right, let's take some questions. I know we have some microphones out here. Yep, there's one over there. Whoever asks a question, just tell us your name, where you're from, and go ahead. And by the way, let's do this Q&A. In other words, not a day.
Hi, my name is Steve Fishman. I'm from Los Angeles. First, I want to thank you for speaking to us and for your service to our country. My question concerns your answer on the quality of our intelligence. We're currently facing a situation with Iran and their ability to develop nuclear weapons and what the red line is. So obviously, without providing specifics, can you give us an idea of what capability we'll have to determine that red line?
Yeah, well, obviously I'm not going to go into specifics on what we do or do not know about Iran. All I can tell you is that the right intel resources are being put towards that problem. We partner with a lot of folks out there to ensure we've got the best intelligence picture that we can have. No intelligence is 100% perfect. We talked about the bin Laden raid. As good as that was, we didn't know for certain. So there's always going to be a degree of uncertainty no matter how good your intelligence is. My point is, with the support that we get from the National Security Agency, from the Central Intelligence Agency, from Defense Intelligence, National Geospatial, the FBI, all of the interagency folks that are out there, that intelligence community is the best in the world. Does that mean that they're going to be right every single time? Absolutely not. But I got to tell you, they are incredible professionals, working exceedingly hard every day to get the president and the decision makers the intel they need to make the right decisions.
We have a question for Walter Isaacson.
Thank you for coming here, Admiral. Earlier this summer at the Aspen Institute, Admiral Mullen and then seconded by Stan McChrystal, General McChrystal, both said that they thought we should return to some system of national service. What are your thoughts about mandatory national service versus the all-volunteer force?
Well, again, probably out of my lane a little bit, other than to say that the all-volunteer force has served us exceedingly well. When you take a look at the quality of the young men and women we have in the service, it's unparalleled. And I was in well before the all-volunteer force. I came in 1977, and if you go back to 73 in my time in ROTC. So I know what the not all-voluntary force was capable of doing. And while they were great folks supporting us, at the end of the day, this all-volunteer force, Bill McRaven's opinion, has served us very, very well.
Yeah, hold on a second. Yeah, go ahead. I'll come to you. I want to get a woman asking a question.
Right. Well, I have a woman-oriented question as well. Thank you for your service, sir, and Wolf, you've done a wonderful job tonight. I admire your role in this in moderating. My question is about women in the military, and I know, as you alluded, women serve on cultural support teams with Special Operations Command. But as you also know, the 1994 ground combat exclusion policy was recently relaxed earlier this year, opening up 14,000 more positions to women in infantry or combat support roles, and 4,000, I think, in the Navy. And there's a pilot program with the Marines right now to allow women into the infantry, but a lot of resistance in the Army for allowing women into our infantry and Ranger School. What are your thoughts on increasing women's role in combat and the eventuality of women as Navy SEALs?
Yeah. Frankly, what we've seen, at least in my time in the military and certainly over the last 10 years, is the phenomenal job that women do everywhere we put them in terms of a military job. I'm always careful to say we don't have women in combat, because I'll tell you, when a cultural support team female, hops on a helicopter with her, Ranger company that's going out to an objective and flies from that forward operating base to an offset location, patrols 6 kilometers to the target, allows the Rangers to secure the target, comes and talks to the females on the target, patrols back to an offset location, gets back on a helicopter, and flies back to a forward operating base. It's hard to distinguish between what she did and what her male counterpart did. And I think everybody in today's environment certainly recognizes that. Again, the law and the policy is not my lane, and so I'll defer to those who look at that. All I can tell you is, the women that are serving with us now are doing an absolutely magnificent job, and we couldn't do the job without them, period.
I'm going to go back, but a quick question, a follow-up, if you will, because I covered this for so many years. Now that gays are allowed to serve openly in the U.S. military, I assume in special operations, among the 66,000 troops that you command, there are gays and lesbians who serve there. Sure. How is that working out? Because we heard all sorts of horror stories, fears that this would be a disaster.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, all we care about is whether you carry your rucksack and you do your job, And so whether you're a female, whether you're gay or lesbian, whether you're a minority, is immaterial to the guy in the military. We just want somebody that steps up and does their job.
And close quarters, has that been an issue at all? Because we heard all sorts of fears that this was going to be bad.
I can tell you, and I don't want to speak for the other services, and I don't want to speak for the folks that are downrange, I can tell you I have not had to deal with any of those issues as the commander of SOCOM. That's not to say that they're not out there and somebody else hasn't had to deal with them, but for right now, nothing has been raised to my level.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Brad Cravoy. I'm a film producer from Los Angeles, and thank you very much for your service. And I had the privilege and honor to work with Lieutenant Colonel Mike Strobel and General Kelly. We produced Taking Chance for HBO that won a Golden Globe for Kevin Bacon. We're working on a 3-part miniseries now, and in view of all the bin Laden controversy over the feature film that's being made, we stepped back from doing our interview about you. So I just have 2 quick questions. I hope you'll humor me. The first is regarding where you were in September 11, and the second is you alluded to the fact that new facts will come out about the raid that would perhaps supplement the book that's already been written that was soon to come out. How soon will that be before that information does come out?
Yeah, again, my point was the details of the intelligence and how we gain the intelligence to identify the compound. In probably 25 years, the real details of that will come out, or maybe later. My only point there was it was a phenomenal intelligence operation. I don't expect that you're going to see it any time coming out in somebody's book or open press. That's not to say we haven't talked in general about the intelligence revolving around the raid, but the details, as we say, the sources and the methods, which we protect very, very carefully, those won't be known for decades. But when that does happen and it becomes unclassified, again, those folks that are still around will be very impressed with it. Where I was on September 11th, I had a parachute accident, and I was laid up in a bed recovering from a parachute accident when it occurred.
How do you feel now?
Great.
Okay, good. Glad. On that sources and methods, there's a huge uproar now, and from your perspective, I'm anxious to get your sense about the leaks, about the bin Laden raid, whether it did undermine sources and methods, it went too far, there are investigations, as you know, on the Hill right now. Can you share a thought with us on how you feel about all this?
Well, we're never happy when leaks occur, obviously. I mean, we go to great lengths to protect our national security, very great lengths to protect our sources and methods. So all of that we guard very carefully. Unfortunately, not everybody guards that very carefully. And I think what you've seen is the Secretary and the President and Capitol Hill are taking these leaks very, very seriously, as they should. And we need to do the best we can to clamp down on it. Because sooner or later it is going to cost people their lives, or it's going to cost us our national security. So it is important, and frankly it's important, I would tell you, for reporters that are here. You know, you're going to hear things, you're going to see things that you think the public needs to know. And I will tell you, I'm not sure the public needs to know all that. A lot of times y'all are racing to a deadline to try and trump the next network, potentially at the expense of somebody's life. And I have had discussions with editors. I have had discussions with editors about the sensitive nature of some of the things they're about to print. And they've been very candid with me and said, you know, if so-and-so is going to beat us to the story, I'm going to print it. And all you can do is make the best case you can. That's not to say that the American people don't need to have a completely transparent government. I got it. And I'm the guy that is working to protect that transparency for all the right reasons. But I do think as reporters, you have an obligation as well. And I would encourage every reporter in this room to accept that responsibility to protect this country.
I couldn't agree more. But has there been, in your mind, without getting into detail, a specific piece of damage to whatever you do as a result of recent leaks?
I can't address specifics. Again, a lot of these
don't tell me the specifics,
yeah.
But just, you know, has a mission been hurt? Has an American life been endangered because of something that appeared in a newspaper or a magazine or on television?
Again, the problem is if I go down that road, I'm going to end up telling you what piece of information.
Don't tell me what piece of information.
Yeah. I mean, are people affected by the information that comes out? You bet they are. Are lives at risk? Absolutely.
All right. You answered the question.
Okay.
All right. We have another question. Ambassador Stuart Burstein.
Thank you. This was very special. I had the great honor to be an American ambassador, and part of that training was spending a day with the Special Forces and watch them do what they do. And hanging out with them afterwards and talking to them, each one of them, all they talked about was being able to execute a real-life situation to see how they would perform. How do you instill that kind of commitment and dedication in these young men and women?
Yeah, well, thank you, Ambassador. Well, I think a lot of them come in with that in their DNA. They come in and they join our organizations because they want to be special. They want to be challenged. They want to be put into difficult situations. And so you have great men and women that are coming into the service. But when they join an organization, you know, a lot of times you join it initially because it's an adventure. When you're young, you're looking for an adventure. And then after a while, that adventure kind of becomes a profession. And then after a while, that profession becomes a calling. And you find in the senior military guys that it has become a calling to them. I mean, it is a very, very powerful self-awareness that it's not about you anymore. It's about a cause that's greater than you, and that's what brings them together.
Elmar Tevison with ZDF German Television. Thank you very much for the insights that you gave us tonight. And I promise I'm hoping for an answer that doesn't endanger any lives, sir. I was thinking that maybe there could be a good argument be made, a very good argument, ethical argument be made for the legitimacy of drone strikes and targeted killings. But you rarely hear about it because officials are not talking about this publicly. Do you think that the public deserves more explanation about the ethical side of targeted killings and drone strikes? And while I'm at it, let me ask the question that David Sanger of the New York Times posted in his book, basically saying, what makes a drone strike different from, for example, plugging an explosive device to a car of an Iranian scientist?
Well, I think you answered your own question a little bit. I mean, the fact of the matter is there's a lot of discussion out there about drone strikes. I see it on the cover of magazines. There's books written about it. So to say that we as an American public or as an international public are not talking about drone strikes, I think is not true. We look at drone strikes, and again, I can tell you within the Afghan framework, and that's what I'm prepared to talk about. We go to great lengths to make sure that our intelligence is as precise as it can be, and we have rules of engagement that are backed up by the law of armed conflict that are looked at through a legal review before we ever even propose a drone strike, recognizing again that in a theater of war, a drone is just the vehicle that takes the weapon to the target. So as long as you are adhering to the law of armed conflict and adhering to the legal protocols, then a drone for us in Afghanistan is no different than an F-15 or an F-16. In terms of the legal aspects of it, again, I'll leave that to the lawyers. What I do know is that as we have very strict rules of engagement that are informed by, that are framed by the law of armed conflict and a whole host of other conventions.
Those drones are pretty good, though.
The drones are pretty good.
Okay. Getting better, too?
And they are getting better, absolutely.
Are they going to replace fighter aircraft at some point?
Oh, we're about to have a change of the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. He's a good friend of mine. I wouldn't even want to go down that road. It's,
let's get another question. Yeah, in the back, go ahead.
Hi, Joni Lieback. Thank you for your incredible service. My question is about drones. Is it accurate to assume they're manufactured abroad, such as in China? And if so, do you have any worry that these secrets of drones or other highly sensitive equipment, that those secrets could come out and eventually be turned against us so that drones would be used against Washington or something? What is your concern? Because I think GE is in China, and they have to share a lot of their secrets with China. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know where the parts of the drones are made. I do know that we have some very strict protocols when it comes to technology transfer. And so we are always working issues of technology transfer. And again, there's a long legal process that the Department of Defense has to go through before any contractor is allowed to transfer technology for any reason. I can't speak specifically to the drone issue.
The only thing I know is we know where the U.S. Olympic team's uniforms were made. Other than that, we don't know where anything else was made. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, Dan Kleidman from Newsweek and the Daily Beast. Thanks for being here, Admiral. Back in May, Mitt Romney was on the campaign trail, and he was asked about the raid on the bin Laden compound. And what he said was, effectively, any president would have made that call. I wonder what you think of that statement.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into that discussion.
Well, let me ask it a different way. Do you think that any president would have made that call?
They didn't teach me this in journalism school. So you ask a question, you rephrase it, you try to come in? No, I'm not going to answer that question.
All right.
It's a good try, though.
All right. Go ahead.
Thank you. Mike Garrett with Boeing in Seattle. In the past, when it's been made public about Special Forces successes, it's usually just said Special Forces. Right. We don't identify which branch it comes from.
Right.
What went behind with respect to identifying the SEALs in this case with the bin Laden success, and how were you involved with that, and what was going through the pros and cons of why we would want to identify them specifically from a risk standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime we have an operation that gets that kind of international scrutiny, invariably people want to understand the good news aspect of the story. And this was a good news aspect of the story. The units that contributed to the success, I think, were part and parcel to that. We do identify units routinely on operations. I mean, we talk about Navy SEALs and Army Green Berets and Army Rangers. So I think it's a little misleading to think that we don't talk about specifics. Now, we don't generally get into the names of the individuals. We're very, very careful about that to protect their families, and that really becomes a red line for us. I mean, if you say it was, SEAL Team 1 or the 75th Rangers that conducted an operation, we're generally okay with that. When you start getting down into the specifics of who did it, that becomes a red line for us because it is really about protecting the individual and their families.
And what's important is that not one name of any of the Navy SEALs who went into Abbottabad has been disclosed.
And frankly, I do give the press a lot of credit for that because my guess is there are folks out there that know some of those names. So to the folks, the members of the press that are here, I greatly appreciate that because it does, when you talk about the fact that will it protect individuals and their families, you bet it will.
This is a sensitive subject, and I know we're almost out of time, but I just want to press you on this because I've been, for many years, very sensitive to it as well. We're all journalists, we're all Americans, but we're human beings. We don't want to see people needlessly get killed. So when somebody in a position of high authority, the military, the civilian rank, comes to us and says, if you report this, lives will be endangered, we listen. And very often, we don't report it.
And we appreciate that.
And it's just a matter of, we'll rather take the chance in getting scooped by somebody else than report information. But it's something that the top military and political leadership can't just use. When they come to us and they say that, and they do from time to time, it's really got to be the real thing. Because if you just, and I hate the expression cry wolf, it's going to really down the road endanger brave young men and women.
No, we absolutely have to have the same integrity that we expect of you if we're going to ask you to protect those, those personnel and those sources and those methods. So no argument there.
Yeah, and at CNN, I can only speak for CNN, we're very sensitive to that because we have viewers in 240 countries around the world who are always watching, including some of those countries not very friendly countries. All right, we have time for one more question. Is there a woman who would like to ask a question? Yes, please. Woman, stand up.
My name's Christine Balling. I'm from Bogota, Colombia, Admiral. You mentioned earlier that there's much that the Special Forces do that is not publicized. Humanitarian assistance, civil affairs, and so on. And I understand on a very superficial level the by, with, and through theory, which is essentially that the Special Forces do not want to put an American face on their work. They would rather increase the legitimacy of a host nation's government in the eyes of the host nation's citizens. Question, are there sometimes an exception to that rule? And if there have been, would you have any examples of that?
Well, I'm sure there's exceptions to every rule, but as a matter of kind of policy and approach, we absolutely want the host nation to get the credit. Colombia is a fantastic example. As you know, we've been working with the Colombians for decades, and certainly since Plan Colombia came into effect, we've had a very great working relationship with the Colombian Special Forces. They are magnificent special operations forces, and they have done a terrific job against the FARC in Colombia. And that is a credit, again, to the Colombian leadership, both political and military leadership, and to the great soldiers that they bring into the Special Forces. We don't hide the fact that we've been working with Colombia and SAW for some time. We embrace that. But what we don't do is it's not about credit for the United States. It is about a partnership with the Colombians that, frankly, is making both of us better. So when we have an opportunity to discuss our relationship with another country, it's not necessarily about giving credit to one force or another. It's to talk about how we're strengthening that partnership and the value of that partnership to both countries.
That wraps up our presentation. I'll have the prerogative of one final question, and you'll leave all of these people. And I think it's fair to say, in the past hour and 15 minutes or whatever we've been up here, we came in with a certain body of knowledge, but we're all leaving a little bit smarter than we were when we came in, which is the goal of this forum. I'm so proud that CNN is co-sponsoring it with the Aspen Institute and the New York Times. So here's the final question, Admiral, and I'll thank you for all the work that you do. At some point, you're going to retire from the U.S. Navy, and you're going to have to go back and to do some civilian work. Right. Here's the question. Have you given up on your dream of becoming a journalist?
Wolf, if I could be as good as you?
No. Just give me a yes or no. Have you given up your dream of becoming a journalist? Because as you know, there are some retired military personnel. We see them talking on television all the time.
Have I given up my dream? Absolutely. Yeah.
Let's give a big round of applause.
Thank you very much.